The medieval war dog, the Middle Ages' fiercest weapon. In a time when knights, castles, and armies dominated Europe, dogs were not just companions. They were trained to fight, guard, and terrify enemies. From charging into battle alongside armored soldiers to protecting fortresses during brutal sieges, these animals became a hidden force that shaped medieval warfare. Their story is not just about loyalty, but about strategy, survival, and the powerful bond between humans and animals on the battlefield. Number 1. The origins of war dogs. In the early Middle Ages, dogs moved from the hearth to the muster field as elites recognized a hard truth of medieval warfare. Reliable force multipliers were rare, and a trained animal that kept formation, bit on command, and held its ground under noise and steel could change the rhythm of a fight. The habit began earlier, with late Roman estates breeding heavy mastiff-type guardians and steppe peoples, often linked to the Alaunts carrying powerful Alaunts lines westward. By the 9th and 10th centuries, these bloodlines blended with local stock, producing large, broad-chested hounds, kept by counts and castellans, not merely for prestige, but for a spectrum of military tasks that mirrored feudal needs. Night watch on palisades, escort for messengers across contested roads, and intimidation when retinues formed in narrow lanes before a raid. Hunting culture accelerated the shift. Boar hunts taught dogs to hold a charging target, ignore pain, and coordinate with riders. Those same instincts mapped neatly onto armored combat, where shock, noise, and sudden movement broke weak nerves. Monastic and princely households recorded expenses for collars, chains, and keepers, hinting at organized kennels that paralleled the structure of a small garrison. Breeds associated with war work coalesced around traits prized by medieval soldiers: thick necks for spiked collars, dense bone for impact, and a stable temperament that tolerated mail jingling, lances clattering, and torches flaring in siege lines. As cavalry gained status, dogs adapted to ride-centric operations, harrying baggage guards, panicking enemy remounts, and trailing wounded through hedgerows after a clash. Crusading routes then spread methods and animals across regions, embedding the image of the Lord with hound as part of the broader military identity of the knight. By the 13th century, the war dog stood as both emblem and instrument, a visible sign of seigneurial authority and a practical tool in an army assembled from vassals, hired spears, and household specialists. Number 2. Training the fierce companions. Kennel life began with selection rather than spectacle. Handlers picked broad-chested mastiff and Alaunts types with steady nerves, a willingness to hold pressure, and a clean bite that could be controlled. Candidates that startled at clashing iron or flinched from torches were culled from war work and sent to hunt or guard granaries. Basic obedience came first: heel, sit, stay, recall drilled on short leads and chain couplers so dogs learned to move as a unit beside squires and footmen. Desensitization followed in layers. Smiths hammered mail and plates at ear-splitting volume. Trumpeters blew calls inches from muzzles, and grooms led horses past while shields rattled, building a calm center under noise. Target discrimination mattered more than theatrics. Dogs were taught to ignore familiar livery and home sense, and to fix on designated cues. Often a coloured pennon, a scent-marked gambeson sleeve, or a padded lure. So aggression could be pointed rather than sprayed. Bite work was framed around 3 commands: take, hold, release. The take was brief and explosive, aimed at a linen dummy or padded limb. The hold trained endurance and jaw placement without shredding. The release kept handlers in charge when the din rose. Spiked collars and thick leather barding were fitted gradually to avoid souring. Weight was added in ounces, not pounds, because endurance mattered on muddy marches more than a showy armor cape. In cavalry drills, dogs shadowed remount strings at a trot until they matched the cadence of hooves, then practiced short flanking bursts to unsettle horses without tangling reins. Camp discipline was relentless. No scavenging, no taking meat from strangers, no responding to thrown bait, because raiders used tainted scraps to thin watch lines. Conditioning mixed hill walks, swim sessions in moats or rivers, and hauling light sledges for core strength, while diet leaned on offal stews thickened with oats and a ration of bones for teeth. Young dogs entered structured work around 6 to 8 months, with full duty closer to 2 years, after joints closed and tempers settled. Handlers logged behaviors in simple tally marks: bark on cue, ignore goats, hold for a count of 30, so progress could be shared when retainers rotated. Failsafes were baked into every sequence. A secondary release cue on a horn note if voice failed, a slip lead quick release for emergencies, and a muzzle protocol during crowded marches to prevent chain reaction bites. The point was not blind fury, but composure under stimulus, the kind that let a hound lie quietly under a trestle during a council, and then rise on a single word or blast to form a moving barrier between banners and approaching steel. Number 3. Dogs in the heat of battle. Deployment started before swords crossed. Handlers walked the hounds along the line so men and horses settled to their presence, then clipped slip leads to a central ring and waited for the signal. When horns called the advance, packs moved ahead of the infantry screen at a steady trot, not a scatter. The first task was to break rhythm in the opposing front, forcing shields to dip and pikes to waver. Spiked collars and thick leather kept necks safe in the crush, while short commands, brief, sharp syllables that cut through metal noise, turned a loose cluster into a directed wedge. Against cavalry, dogs worked angles, slipping for fetlocks and stirrup legs to unseat riders without getting trapped under hooves. The point wasn't mauling, but disruption that opened seconds for spearmen to finish the job. Archers learned to fear a release, timed with their draw hounds sprinting low, pushing bowmen to move their feet and spoil volleys meant for the shield wall. During town fights, animals followed tight alleys and courtyards where polearms struggled to swing. They flushed crossbowmen from doorways, forced gates by sheer pressure, and guarded captured lanes, while sappers dragged hurdles or ladders forward. On siege nights, dogs patrolled the ditches, catching the scent of raiding parties and alerting watchmen before ropes touched parapets. At dawn, they ranged the counterscarp to find dropped gear, lost messengers, or wounded hiding in scrub. Communication used redundancy: a colored pennon, a horn pattern, and a hand sign. So a command survived smoke, dust, or a snapped leash. Friendly fire risks were managed with simple rules: never release directly into your own arrow lane, keep one dog per file leader, and break pursuit at a fixed boundary marked by a banner. Logistics mattered as much as courage. Paws packed with goose fat before marches, water staged in shallow tubs, and handlers tasked to rotate work so no animal hit exhaustion in the first clash. After the line buckled and the rout began, dogs shifted roles again, chasing stragglers only to a set distance, then turning back to guard the baggage, the prisoners, and the wounded, holding a hard perimeter while men counted standards and gathered the fallen. Number 4. Life with the Knights. Kennels sat close to the Great Hall, but downwind of the kitchens, a practical choice that kept handlers within earshot of the steward, and far enough to manage smell and noise. A kennel master ran the space like a small garrison, with squires assigned to muck out straw, oil leather, and check paws after drills. A knight's day wrapped dogs into his routine. Before dawn, horses watered, hounds walked the palisade, and a quick obedience circuit. Heel, down, hold kept responses sharp before men headed to the tilt yard. Hunting doubled as training because boar and stag demanded the same nerve as battle. Coursing greyhounds taught speed and recall in open ground, while heavier boarhounds practiced controlled grips that translated into directed force against armored legs. Household records often earmarked offal, oats, and bones for kennel rations, with salt and vinegar used to clean cuts and honey, or rendered fat packed into wounds. Wormwood, garlic, and ash were common remedies against fleas, and goose fat rubbed into pads before winter marches reduced cracking. Collars carried more than spikes. Stamped badges, dyed leather, or a ring of bells identified lordship in a crush of banners, and a spare slip-lead hung from each squire's belt as insurance in crowded markets or church festivals. In the hall, discipline mattered. No begging at trestles, no taking meat from unfamiliar hands, and a strict place under benches during councils so messengers could pass safely. Status flowed through these animals. Effigies on tombs show knights with a hound at the feet, shorthand for fidelity, and tapestries pair ladies with sight hounds to signal refinement and control. Law codes and household ordinances treated valuable dogs like equipment. Fines for theft, rules for kennel cleanliness, and duties for night watch made them part of the estate's defensive plan. On campaign, tents for the kennel stood near the remount lines, water staged in shallow troughs, and a rotation chart kept fresh dogs on dawn patrols. After skirmishes, they guarded prisoners and baggage, while armourers checked mail and set rivets. The bond ran through work, not sentimentality. Calm in the hall, burst on command, and back to stillness when the horn told them the job was done. Number 5. Siege warfare and dogs as weapons. In siege conditions, dogs shifted from shock assets to endurance tools that held lines and kept craftwork safe. On the attacker's side, they patrolled the ring of circumvallation at set intervals, a living tripwire that caught small breakout parties and thieves targeting the artillery park, powder wagons, or grain. Handlers paired hounds with engineers under mantillas, while gabions were filled, because a steady dog sensed movement in ditches faster than a distracted laborer. A brief growl often gave sappers a second to step back from a sudden gate rush. Night work made the most of scent and routine. Patrols walked the same silent loops, so the animals learned where a new footprint, cut brush, or shifted ladder meant risk. On the defender side, dogs guarded posterns and wells, moved short messages through smoke-choked corridors when runners hesitated, and kept prisoners compliant after sorties brought captives inside. Countermining benefited from canine attention as well. When teams listened at drilled boreholes, dogs that stiffened or angled their heads toward a faint vibration helped triangulate the direction of enemy tunneling, saving time and timber. Chroniclers described spiked collars and light leather capes as protection against splinters and hooks, with quick release rings to free a tangled animal near chevaux de frise. Logisticians adjusted feed to siege scarcity offal stews, thickened with oats, marrow bones on rest days, and staged shallow troughs so water and paw care were never far from ladders or hoardings. Noise conditioning mattered as bombards and great crossbows thumped through the night. Hounds trained to ignore the concussion, but respond to a distinct horn call or banner flap, preventing panic in crowded works. Tales of incendiary harnesses surface in later anecdotes, yet the practical problems control, wind, and the risk of friendly fire kept such ideas rare compared with proven duties. Sentry denial through constant barking, escort for carpenters and fletchers, and quick checks of breached alleys before men-at-arms advanced. Limits were understood. Thick smoke dulled scent, arrow sleet punished exposed patrols, and prolonged scarcity thinned even disciplined kennels. Still, when exhaustion and fear did most of the killing at sieges, a dog's steady presence, predictable routes, crisp cues, and exact boundaries bought the small margins that let siege craft, not rumor or rage, decide the day. Number 6. The legacy of the medieval war dog. The medieval war dog outlived its battlefield peak, not as a relic, but as a set of practices that migrated into courts, kennels, and, much later, modern working dog doctrine. When handheld firearms and artillery reshaped tactics, hounds shifted from shock to security. Patrols along baggage lines, night watch at bridges, and guard duty in siege parks became the durable roles that survived gunpowder. Elite households codified kennel management like a small quartermaster corps' ration charts, rotation schedules, and leather maintenance mirrored the logistics of a retinue, and those habits filtered into civic watch systems, where dogs escorted beadles and protected storehouses. Iconography kept the animal woven into knightly identity. Tomb effigies with a hound at the feet linked fidelity to service, while heraldic charges like the Talbot fixed the dog as a visual shorthand for steadfastness and pursuit. Hunting culture carried military muscle memory across generations. Boarhounds practiced controlled grips, sighthounds refined recall and line discipline, and packs learned to ignore bait and noise, all behaviors that later policing and military kennels reframed as desensitization, discrimination, and release on command. Legal references to fines for theft of valuable dogs, rules for kennel cleanliness near stables, and penalties for baiting defenders' animals show how estates treated trained hounds as accountable equipment, not ornament. The Crusading era's exchange of breeding stock and methods left an afterimage in regional types: the mastiff-bodied guardian, the wolfhound-sized courser, while the broader lesson was selection for nerves first, size second, a priority that modern canine programs still treat as non-negotiable. Myths about explosive or incendiary harnesses persisted in storytelling, yet the practical legacy lies in quieter competencies. Early warning on dark perimeters, calm in crowds, and a bias for control over fury. By the time centralized states professionalized armies, the medieval dog's battlefield autonomy had narrowed, but its disciplines heal under stress, hold without frenzy, release on cue moved intact into garrison towns, customs patrols, and eventually 20th century service kennels. The fiercest weapon of the Middle Ages left its mark less in famous charges than in the normal, repeatable routines that turned animal instinct into reliable labor, a through line from castle ditch to modern checkpoint.